Welcome, and thanks for joining me today on Mortgage Manager Playbook, a podcast for sales leaders who want to improve their team's sales performance and originate more loans. I'm Pat Sherlock, your host. Today's topic I'm very excited about, going into a new market. I have the perfect expert, Chris Blevins. He is the National Sales Director, Managing Director at Primis Mortgage. Previous to that, Chris was with CMG, Movement Mortgage, and other mortgage companies. Hi, Chris.
Hey Pat, how are you?
I'm doing good. So let's talk about before we jump into the main topic, because I think it's such a perfect topic for especially going into next year. How'd you get into the world of mortgage lending?
Gosh, that was a long, long time ago. So that was, yeah, now I just say 25 plus years. So that just makes it easy. But yeah, it was in, I guess, early to mid 90s and
Hmm.
sort of fell into it out of the finance company world. So if you remember the high
Yeah.
rate finance companies and so forth, I kind of cut my teeth doing a lot of that, making loans, collecting loans, kind of
Hmm.
mentality. And got the opportunity to join a brokerage in Nashville, Tennessee,
Okay.
and joined that and started really doing mortgages, and everything else. And I always laugh. I mean, that was before credit scores and before Section 32. You know what I mean, and stuff like that. And yeah, the whole
Yeah.
credit score world and everything else. So started doing loans and doing mortgages and so forth, and just sort of worked my way through the industry over the years. So.
Well, I can relate to that because that's actually similar to how I got into the business. I actually started out as a collector at a finance company too. So it's small
There
world
you
for
go.
sure. That's
Yep.
what probably makes us good salespeople. Would you think? You know?
I always say that was the best training that you know what I
Sure.
mean that any of us received, I think, in this industry. So
Yeah, I agree with you. So let's talk about, and certainly you've been around long enough to talk about what are some issues that you think lenders should be addressing that really haven't been addressing?
that's sort of there's a lot of different
Mm,
things in today's world. Obviously, the challenges after COVID and trying to, do you bring loan officers back into offices? Do you have
mm,
offices? You know what I mean? Some of those
yeah,
challenges. I think a lot of it has fundamentally changed in our industry of trying to really be able to be a dynamic company that relies and values the processors, you know what I mean, and everybody else
sure.
to be able to work from home. Certainly productivity is sort of the key factor in a lot of those things, and making sure how do you manage culture and how do you manage all these different things and everything else when it's far away. And I think a lot of it is doing a lot of this, you know what I mean, there's a lot of the Zoom calls and being face to face, and I think that's been a huge challenge. And then certainly, how do you continue to operations costs, you know what I mean,
Sure.
it goes into everything because technology is changing every day. And so
Hmm.
I find a lot of companies still want to sort of live by those years where, before, pre-COVID, you know what I mean, for example,
Sure.
in those kind of years where it's just not the same, industry as then. And I think a lot of companies it's hard for them to adapt, to what's up and coming in technology and really focusing in on, the hard decisions, which is, cost to produce, and how do you manage through that, especially the larger platforms.
Well, that's really a great point, and really, we probably need to do a separate
Yeah.
podcast on that topic because I'm with you on that. I think less is more. But that's not obviously the strategy in our business in many ways, from even recruiting and so forth. But talk about next year since it's right around the corner. Like, what are some of the priorities that you are wanting to, really emphasize?
So for us, I think a couple of things. I mean, so I joined Premise, and the idea really behind joining this company and so forth was being able to take a small platform and being able to grow in
Mm,
today's world, right? And being able to, and I say in today's world from a standpoint of how do you utilize technology? How do I take technology and really help the loan officer go find one more loan? And
mm,
regardless, I mean, I've heard a couple of your podcasts, a few of and what I love to hear from some of the other guests
mm,
were, even if you look at, the folks that have been doing this for 10, 15 years, how do you help them sort of adapt to the
mm.
changes? Again, I mean, someone coming from 25 plus years in this industry, teaching an old dog new tricks is a challenge. But I think for us, it's like, how do you utilize technology? How do you use marketing? I hear a lot of loan officers ask me, and I get this question a lot is, what kind of AI or what kind of technology do you guys have to help me grow my business? And in so many companies, I think, they have the technology in today's world to help operationally wise, but do they really have, the technology to help? How do you help that loan officer through marketing or through AI or through videos and some different things reach more clients and more referral partnerships to be able to get them to, have one more loan or five more loans, because I think volume is going to be a key factor for everybody going forward. So.
Well, that's for sure. And I definitely see it in the classes where it is, to me, rather striking is that so many loan officers still are not using technology at all.
Right.
And I think that's a separator when you go to hire people because you can relive the old days, but the reality of it is that we've moved into a much different space. So I think
Yeah.
this is a good topic to move into talking about going into a new market. And let's start off in the big question. How do you determine what market to go into? Where does that come from? And then we can talk about the nitty-gritty of how you recruit for them.
I've never been one, to say, okay, I'm just going to focus in on, one market and I'm just,
Yeah.
we're going to go build it and they will come kind of mentality.
Hmm.
A lot of it is casting a wide net to trying to figure out where you want to be. But I
Hmm.
say that as well from a standpoint of, for us, for example, I mean, our center of influence, if you will, or who we know is where we're probably going to do best at
Hmm.
in going into a new market. So for us, the leadership team and everything else, I mean, we focus in on, for us, the Southeast and the
Yeah.
Midwest and, and some of those markets where we probably have more of a presence of, past folks that we've worked with and so forth. And so we'll sort of focus in on there, I guess, in a wider net of that area. And then it's really becomes, who do you know? And I say that from a standpoint of past relationships and really try to focus in on that because I think finding that leader then in those markets are going to be, where you want to focus in on, whether that's the, Chicago market or something. And then it's like,
Hmm.
okay, where do I find a plant my base, if you will, to kind of cast my net into those areas? So.
So is the initial analysis on the demographic side or in certain parts of the country are attractive versus other? Are we looking at job numbers or is that type of analysis go into play at all?
Not for me, you know what I mean? Not to say that
Sure,
some industries and some other companies and stuff may not look at that. I mean, especially what they're selling. Certainly, I look at loan sizes, right? You know what I mean? I mean,
sure,
certainly a larger loan size, but the higher the loan size, the more aggressive, you know what I mean, from a
sure.
standpoint of competitiveness and those kind of things come into play. So going into a new market, again, I'm looking at somewhere it's like, okay, this is a good market. It's got nice, average loan sizes, but it's got a good mix as well of business
Hmm.
opportunities. It's not strictly just a, high bow market, or it's not strictly just a,
Hmm.
conventional market. And on vice versa, it's not strictly just your FHA markets or, some of those kind of areas as well. Really find somewhere where there's a lot of opportunity. I also look at it from a standpoint of, where's the competitiveness of,
Right.
of some of the other companies that are in that market. And there's certain markets that certainly have a larger, I guess, relationships with certain companies that have just been in those areas for a long time. And that could be good or bad, right? You know what I mean? Kind of a thing that could
Hmm.
go both ways as well. So, and then that goes back to how well do you know this person? How well, how much do you trust this person going into the market to help you, do everything that you need to do to get to where your company's vision is.
Yeah. So talk about, obviously it's centered on the leadership component. It sounds like that's what you do first through your, discussions with folks, looking for the right leader. And then does that drive what geographic area you go into?
Certainly it does. I find there's a lot of, there's really good loan officers that do very well that can sit on an island, if you will, and do their thing because they're so, they're so
Sure.
focused in on what they're doing and their amount of business and they really don't need help. You know what I mean? From a standpoint of going out there getting business, they don't need a manager to tell them to, you know, to get up. You know what I mean? And do certain things and this is how I would do this. But if you really want to focus in on, all right, I want to grow, the Midwest market or a certain area of the country or whatever, I do find, there's got to be someone that's kind of a pinpoint person that you can go to and say, help me grow into that market. There's none of us that know every market across the country. You know what I mean? And
No,
know
right.
the compensation pieces or where you need to go on this and everything else, or who's good, who's not, you know what I mean? And those things. And so I say that from a standpoint of, I
Yeah.
need to find the right person that understands that market the best. So,
Yeah. And so when you're looking, this is through your contacts, I assume,
mhm.
and not using outside recruiters.
Yeah, mainly, I mean, that's where we're looking at internally
Hmm.
is, it's not to say that we haven't used outside recruiting
Sure.
firms in the past, but certainly I feel like that's a better support mechanism than it is initially to go find that right individual that's going to be a solid leader in the market, that's well respected, that has the same sort of vision that our company has. Because again, every company has maybe a little bit different vision, whether it's their, compensation package or their model of, how they pay.
Right.
I know some companies do the P&L model versus some companies just
Hmm.
have the straight corporate retail platform. What are you looking for in regards to that? And then both companies do a great job, I think, in how they manage those opportunities. It's just a matter of how your company is set up and, and then who to go after and talk to. So.
So how do you, in other words, for those that, in other words, looking for the loan officer side of it, it's obviously, it sounds like you're also involved with doing that, not just the leadership side of it. And so how do you do that process? Is that I look in LinkedIn and I, I come up with a list and I use LinkedIn Recruiter or something. What's it look for you?
So for me, two things. One is again, once I sort of find that right leader and someone
Hmm.
who's going to do, knows that industry, knows the market,
Right.
I should say, not the industry, knows their market well and knows the
Hmm.
surrounding cities or states, whether
Hmm.
given whatever position they're looking at. A lot of that has to do with, okay, who do they know? And again, then it's starting to branch out into those, facets. Utilizing LinkedIn, I think, was one time a great thing and everything else. And it's not to say it's
Yeah.
not a good platform today. It's just one of those the technology pieces somewhere where you can go sort of look around in there. But most loan officers, especially, they've sort of veered away from the recruiting aspects of those. And really that's where it becomes the relationship business and just having just good conversations and in general, what someone is looking for.
So talk about that. What is it you're seeing? Because you're obviously recruiting every day. And so what is it you're seeing that loan officers and leadership are really asking for? And is it different than what it was 5 years ago? Or what is your thoughts on that?
Funny you ask that. I think it has changed a lot. The industry, 5 years ago, we were all sort of, that takes you kind of back into the pre-COVID a little bit,
Sure.
going into that marketplace, and there was still a large dynamic, and we had came out of some certain markets, and there was a lot of, factors around,
Yeah.
rates, and some of
Hmm.
that. And now I truly feel a lot of seasoned professionals in our industry have came to the factor of, okay, what does next year, for example, bring? There's a huge refi opportunity at some point
Hmm.
that's going to come into play. And, there's a temporary view of what that looks like. We're always going to be sort of a purchase driven, referral based company. But I say that from a standpoint of, I think a lot of loan officers in today's world are looking for how is a company going to be able to support us through that refi window, whether that's
Right.
6 months or whether that's 3 months or what that
Hmm.
looks like. Time will tell. But I think a lot of loan officers are, can you support what I'm going to be doing, what I'm going to be looking for, the business that I'm going to be able to bring in, and then sort of the long term strategy. What is
Hmm.
the long term strategy of the company? I find as well that a lot of loan officers have kind of got tired of of
Hmm.
sort of the huge corporate model and are looking for, again, back to the basics a little bit,
Hmm.
just being able to, how can my DNA help a company grow and have conversations with anyone and utilize the
Hmm.
aspects of the relationship piece and in a
So
smaller platform.
So are you seeing, Chris, and I was just on a podcast the other day, and are you seeing loan officers asking more for more managing out of their managers? I mean, are you hearing that type of conversation? Because that certainly was part of the focus
For
that
sure.
was where the loan officers aren't happy with a lot of the managing that's going on. That's what they keep saying. Is that what you hear also?
I hear the same. It's, I love the phrase, and, we all say it a lot of times, is knowledge is power, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think if you're not providing some type of value
Mm-hmm.
to your teammates, you know what I mean? And as a manager, I guess there comes the title, and everybody seems like they want to be a manager, but then they really don't want to manage, right? You know what I mean?
Sure.
They don't want to take that responsibility. And sometimes it's leading with, hey, here's the good and here's the bad. I love
Mm-hmm.
to use the phrase with my team as well, like the best managers kind of sit on top of the engine, you know what I mean, and look out the front of the engine, and they can
Yeah,
see a little bit further sometimes versus, what's happening this month or next month.
sure.
And it's really predicting out, 6 months from now, what does that look like? And then how do you really help your team do more business, and whether that's providing more products or that's providing more just knowledge around the industry,
Yeah.
around something that they want to hear more about, maybe that's secondary or capital markets, and then it's really then putting the right people
Mm-hmm.
in touch with them to help them sort of hear from the
Mm-hmm.
professionals in that area of the
Sure.
business. I
Sure.
think it's a key factor.
So when you're going into a market, I'm curious, and you've identified it, typically how long does it take you to actually get it going and up and running? Is it 6 months, 2 years, 5 years? What are some of the experiences
It's
you've
a
had?
it's in a lot of companies you see this, right? You see them come in and it's like, man, if they don't see something happening in the first 30, 60 days, then
Yeah,
they,
yeah,
wow, it's kind of like marketing. If you're going to do it one time, don't do it at all.
sure.
To me, I think you're really not going to see a whole lot for the first up until about 6 months. Really, it's about a 6 month window before you really start to see the fruits of your labor,
Hmm.
a little bit. And then it's really that 6 to 18 months that you see growth, that you really see the loan officers that now they've kind of figured out the systems. They figured out who to go to. They know those sections of it. And it's not to
Hmm.
say you're not seeing some volume coming in and some loans and some of the transactions that are starting to happen. But really, the longer the mature of a group of individuals stay at a company, the better they get.
Sure.
And you see that in markets. You start to see it again in that 6 month, and then at 12 months, what that window looks like. Now you've really kind of got a nice group that's gelling probably well, and then you really start enhancing your sort of your business with them and helping them close more loans.
So what works in the onboarding component to make sure that everything is going to start correctly? And then I'm curious about how long does it take you to know, well, gee, this was a mistake.
I think you honestly figure out the mistake piece of it in the first 60 days.
Right, right, right,
You're not going to see the fruits of your labor for the first 6 months or so, but you
right.
also know in the first 60 days, okay, you know what I mean? I've made a mistake here just because of the communication pieces is a
Sure.
breakdown, or you're not seeing, you know, the conversations that you're having may sort of turn in reverse and be like, okay, you start to hear other things,
Yeah,
and certainly we've all made mistakes doing those things and,
sure.
stubbing our toes there. But, I think that's probably when you start to see your errors or whatever, and then you either fine tune it or not. So
So do you try to eliminate or reduce the risk level by hiring multiple teams, or is it typically your strategy to go in and get one core group and then you build off of that? Or what is it that you found has worked?
I think finding that core group, I think
Yeah,
that's a key factor. And you had mentioned in one of your questions, and I think that's the great question. I don't want to bypass that, was, the onboarding experience has got to
sure.
be it's got to be an amazing experience, because again, I mean, this business is about relationships. At the end of the day, it's
Right.
it's having conversations like this. It's talking through things. It's really, who do you know? And a loan officer is the best recruiter, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's successful. That's happy. And
Hmm.
maybe they're not out talking or they're not recruiting and doing those kind of things, but what they're doing is they're showing what they're doing to be successful, and everyone sees that. And people want to be around successful people. It's just
Hmm.
natural. and they also see the successes that they can help, drive. Maybe that's, the amount of the business, right? Or being just happy, you know what I mean, in the market is not a bad
Yeah.
thing, right? You know what I mean? It's not always about, the highest producer wins. It's
Hmm.
really, hey, I'm really happy in my company and this is why I'm happy. And that could be, I'm hitting what I need to hit to be successful for me and my family. And I
Hmm.
think as a company, we have to also embrace that and
Hmm.
also know that, just because we want everyone to do X amount of business or this or this
Right.
or this doesn't mean that's what they want. So my goal is to make sure like they're happy, they're hitting the goals that they want to hit. But that onboarding experience, going back to that, has got to be something that's done right. It's done well,
Hmm.
especially, I mean, no one, they don't have anyone else to sort of fall back to in their local market that has been there. So once that market is sort of established and they've been around for, again, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, now you have, the experience level of someone in the offices that is sitting there and that can
Sure.
answer a question here or there and do some different things. But you always want to make sure the onboarding experience is a good
Hmm.
one,
Hmm.
and you're investing a lot of money into someone. And I feel like that's where a lot of companies have made the mistakes in the past, has gone to, there's no in-house, no in, in-store training, in-house training kind of a thing. It's
Right.
all, everything's automated, and, you spend all this time trying to get someone to join your company or your platform or see
Yeah.
your vision and everything else. And as soon as they sign, then you just leave them, you know what I mean? Or whatever. And it's like, okay, here's your computer, good luck.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
that's dangerous. So.
Yeah, too often that does happen. And my last question, it sounds like an emphasis is really put on the cultural component of matching to your culture. And does that mean that you're doing obviously multiple interviews? And how do you figure that all out, the cultural match?
That's one thing that culture has been a buzzword for years, right? You know what I mean?
Oh
It
yeah.
started
Oh yeah.
off, gosh, whatever, 10 years ago and everything else
Sure.
after 2008, right? And it was like culture, culture, culture. And a lot of companies want to sell culture, but they can't explain it. They can't define culture.
Sure.
The one thing that I will mention is John Owens, who's our CEO at our
Hmm.
company, wrote a book on culture. And, and he explains it very well because it's a very,
Hmm.
it's got to be about transparency. And I mentioned that earlier. I mean, we do a lot of calls with our whole company, and we want them on Zoom calls. You know what I mean? We want to see
Sure.
faces, we want to see their whites in their eyes, and we're okay with wearing baseball caps, right? You know what I mean? And hey, look, you know what I mean? You're wearing your t-shirt, that's fine. Really
Yeah.
what we're trying to say is, we want to see that smile, we want to see their reaction, we want to see those things.
Hmm.
And again, it's also when you're, talking to that new leader, does that new leader believe in the vision of, where you want to be?
Where you're going.
Tell people, if you're looking for a company that's doing, $20 billion a year, well, I'm not your guy. You know what I mean? I mean,
Right.
that's not who I am today, and who we want to be tomorrow. And when I say tomorrow, in the next, 3 to 6 years, what our vision is of our company, is this something that you would be able to support, you would be able to see and be a long-term employee of us
Mhm.
or a teammate of us? Because really, at the end of the day, that's where, if you have those, conversations and those kind of things, you can really find out, you know, where you can help them grow, and us not outpace them and them not outpace us, right? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? From that
sure.
standpoint. But everyone wants that opportunity to grow, whether it's through life, personally or through business. And that's kind of what we're looking for. And so culture is a big deal for us. So.
Well, I think it's a real differentiator, and I'm glad that you really support it because I think there's always a lot of talk in mortgage lending about culture, but not actually doing. So I'm with you on that one. So, Chris, we only have a few minutes left. Would you like to share a couple takeaways for our listeners today?
Yeah, I would say, for me, the industry is changing. You know what I mean? And we all
Hmm.
have to adapt to what tomorrow is going to be. I say that as well as none of us are getting younger. So, how do we help the next sort of group or that age bracket or whatever,
Hmm.
and let's identify. I love identifying. And for us, that's one thing that we are doing now is we're identifying who's our next steps, who's the next leaders. You mentioned one of your first questions, how'd you get in this industry? And we all
Yeah.
have a story. And at
We
the end of
do.
the day, I would say that's where I kind of look at this as like, I want to leave sort of a legacy of like, okay, I remember this guy who helped me get in this industry, right?
Yeah.
And if I can be that guy to one person, to 10 people, or whatever the case is, I think that's a huge opportunity that I never want to be able to walk away from. And I would challenge all of us, you know what I mean, that have been doing this business now for 20 plus years and we have 10, 15 years left or whatever, is
Yeah.
how can we be a game changer, to the industry of tomorrow? And I think that's educating. And I think
Hmm.
that's trying to help, the younger generation of tomorrow of this industry learn, be a little bit better, do a little bit more, and help them be successful.
Well, I'm with you on that topic for sure. I'll have to have you come back and talk about it because I do know that you do bring in people not from our industry, which is really, I think, another item that's talked about but never actually done. So it says a lot about your firm for sure. Well, I want to thank you for sharing all your wisdom today. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And certainly, if you would like to listen to other podcasts, go to patsherlock.com. We also have a YouTube channel. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you, Pat. Have a great one.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for listening to Mortgage Manager Playbook. You can catch up on all our episodes by subscribing to receive each week a new show. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and team members. If you're looking to increase production, call me to discuss my prospecting sales training program, Ramping Up Realtor Referral Sources. Check out my website, www.patsherlock.com.